Hello, guys. Hi. Hi. This is my first time using a mic, so please let me know if you can't hear me. My name is Lena Hosien, and this is my professor, Michael Karras. And today we're presenting my master's project, and it's called Language Teacher Self-Efficacy and its Predictors in Iranian Contexts. Do I just press you? Oh, interesting. Okay. So they kind of already talked about this in the previous presentation, but just a little bit of a recap. What is self-efficacy? So we just have a bunch of definitions on the slide. So if you take a look, we start with Mendora's definition: individuals' beliefs in their capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to produce given attainments. Basically, what this means is our confidence in our own abilities to successfully complete specific tasks. So as we already know, that's not the same as self-esteem. It's not the same as self-concept. We're not talking about self-worth. We're more talking about our perceived capabilities, what we think we are able to do. So in this case, we're talking about language teacher self-efficacy specifically, and that's teachers' individual beliefs about their own abilities to successfully perform specific learning and teaching related tasks within the context of their own classrooms. So in our literature review, we took a look at quite a few predictors, one of which was academic qualifications. And in our research, we discovered very, very mixed evidence on degree levels, whether or not they're truly beneficial or not towards our self-efficacy. So a lot of studies found, or some studies found, some positive relationships. Others found very minimal benefits. And one example is Akbari and Tavasoli, where they found minimal benefit of having an MA over a BA because it's just MAs are very theory heavy. So whether or not they're beneficial is questionable. Practicum experiences are generally seen as having the biggest impact in some studies. And in order for them to be considered even more impactful, to make them collaborative is something that has been seen as beneficial in previous research. The next predictor we looked at was language proficiency, as the other presentation already talked about. So we can see that language proficiency tends to have play an important role in LTSE. And we can see in so many different contexts that there is a consistent positive relationship. So that's in EFL teachers in Venezuela, it's in French immersion teachers, it's in teachers with C1, C2 proficiency, it's in the Iranian context, it's everywhere. So it's pretty consistent. In terms of teaching experience, we found that there are generally mixed findings overall. Some studies indicate that there's a positive link in different contexts. So as you can see on the slide, Ontario ESL, FSL, Japan, US, and again, Iran. But also we found a lot of studies indicated that there was no significant relationship. So that one was also very mixed. Now, the last predictor we took a look at was teaching context. And the general trend here is that private school teachers they reported higher LTSE than public school teachers. And this was often due to, it's been attributed to better resources, conditions, supportive environments, and feedback, versus in public schools, they tended to have lower self-efficacy because of large classes, low student proficiency, limited training, limited time, etc. So just to transition into our own study, these are the research questions that kind of guided our research. Now, the first question was, what levels of self-efficacy are reported by Iranian EFL teachers? Second question had two parts. To what extent does LTE and practicum experience influence LTSE? The third one, what is the relationship between self-reported proficiency and LTSE? Fourth, what is the relationship between teaching experience and LTSE? And last one, to what extent does teaching context influence LTSE? Pass it over to Michael.
Thanks, Lena. So these are the context and the participants. So this is from my doctoral thesis that I did with Professor Fayez in 2019. So this is the subset of the data. We'd never reported this at all, but that's where the data was a little bit of a mess. So that's where if you've seen some interesting methodological choices in how we grouped things, that's why. Because we dream of studies, we hope we get equal numbers of people. It just never works that way. So we have to make decisions. So we'll talk about some of the limitations perhaps. But there's 78 Iranian English language teachers here, a range of language teacher education. We were actually pretty excited that there's a lot of MA and PhD. So it gave us a chance to compare that, which is not something I've seen very much. 42 had done a practicum, 22 did not. Their average English proficiency, these teachers believe they're about the C1 level, according to the CEFR. Pretty experienced group, 10 years, and they taught in a range of contexts, but we isolated 20 at the university context and 42 in private institutes in Iran. Yeah. So it was a quantitative design with the survey. Use the English language teacher self-efficacy scale. And that was, measuring LTSE in ELT context using the can-do statements that we'll see some examples. And the analysis, as you see there's descriptive statistics, ANOVAs, and t-tests as well. So these are the reliabilities of the subscales. So you'll notice they're slightly different. So the study that we just presented on in Turkey, we decided to alter a few things, make it more specific to the Turkish context, but you see very similar, same idea. We gathered a lot of data. This study overall for my thesis was from 571 teachers, so a good sample. And we did factor analysis again, and just meaning that we take the items, run them through analysis and see which items kind of correlate and find each other. And these are the subscales that we had there. And reasonable reliability for all of them there. Not perfect, but reasonable enough. So, okay, I promised items. Here we go. Here are items. So I apologize. This is an assault on your eyes. I'm not going to read every one, and I don't expect you to read every one, but to just give you an overview of what we mean. So these are kind of the basic way we present self-efficacy items. So we ask teachers, what's your confidence in your ability? So I can use English as the medium of instruction. These are all out of 6. This is the classroom proficiency one, thinking about our capabilities for professional English to enact different teaching tasks in the language of instruction. And so again, we'll run through them quickly. That's classroom proficiency. This is learner-focused instruction. So make appropriate use of learners' first languages, apply knowledge of their native languages. And so this one a little bit lower, considering it's out of 6, but still, reasonably up there. This was assessment. The assessment items they all find each other very easily. That's nice. So these ones, again, a little bit lower for assessment, but you see the idea there. So for the bottom one, I can use various assessment techniques, and 4.67 was their confidence in that. Language instruction items, bit of a range there. So we have it morphology, syntax, semantics, phonology. We did include, for example, pragmatics, but this is where you have to make those tough decisions if it doesn't go into the factor analysis the way you want it to, and it's a problematic item. So we ended up removing it. That's maybe a conceptual gap, but these are the language instruction ones that were strong enough to keep as part of the survey. And then culture, again, use my knowledge about cultural values, a shorter subscale, but there you go, culture items, 4.97, and materials. So there, we just presented every individual self-efficacy item to you. I hope it was worth it. I don't know. I always go back and forth if to do that or not. I know it's a lot of data on the screen, but there you go. There are the overall means. So 5.03 out of self-efficacy, that's really common. When teachers, when we think about our confidence, you can see teachers, they never want to go 6 out of 6. They never want to go 2 out of 6. We're always right in the meaty middle. We're not arrogant. We're not incompetent. We're right in that meaty middle. So 5 out of 6 out of the overall self-efficacy. When you look at it statistically, that's very common. We can determine what that means and the limitations of survey work, but these are the overall means we found for the different self-efficacy subscales.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so moving on to research question number 2. So research question number 2 had 2 parts. We talked about LTE and practicum. So on these next 2 slides, you'll see LTE. Here you can see that we have split up our group of teachers into 3 groups. So no LTE, master's, and PhD. In this case, you can see that there are no, we did the ANOVA, one-way ANOVA, and you can see that on this slide, there are no significant results in any of the subscales. And it's the same kind of pattern here, no significant results among the subscales. With research question number 2, the second part was practicum's influence on self-efficacy. So in this case, you can see that we did an independent samples t-test, and we compared teachers who had done a practicum to those who hadn't done a practicum. And you can see that teachers who did a practicum tended to have higher self-efficacy than those who didn't. However, the significant result was only found in materials, but we kind of discussed it and we figured that because the teachers had so much experience and they were very far removed from the practicum, we aren't quite sure how much impact the practicum has on this result. The next thing is impact of proficiency. Here you can see that we split up our teachers into below C1 level and above C1 level. Those with higher proficiency tended to have higher self-efficacy. And here you can see the results of the independent sample C test. You see classroom proficiency was very significant, which means that they're confident using English in their classrooms. And you can also see learner focused instruction and also language instruction is a significant result. Moving forward into teaching experience here, there's a lot of information, but basically what you need to know, we split up our teachers into novice, mid-range, experience, and there are no significant results. So more teaching experience doesn't necessarily equal higher self-efficacy. Moving on to the impact of teaching context on LTSE. Here, we compared university teachers to private teachers, and we did an independent sample C test, and we found the only significant result was in classroom proficiency. But again, we question that because it could just mean that the teachers have higher proficiency level in private schools. So we're not entirely sure if that necessarily means their self-efficacy is higher in that subscale. Moving on to the discussion here. So as you can see from this slideshow, the teachers generally reported high self-efficacy, especially in classroom proficiency, language instruction, and materials, but lower in culture, learner-focused instruction, and assessment. Now, this was also a pattern found in CARIS 2019 in Swanson. With regards to formal LTE, there were no significant LTSE differences between MA and PhD groups, and this was probably because of the theoretical orientation of the programs. And in terms of practicum experience, as we saw, it's not horribly impactful, and probably because they were far removed from their practicums.
Thank you. So back to proficiency, we see again, proficiency, it's all the results show that it's a positive relationship if you do it correlationally. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to start experimenting with different methodologies. When you do the correlations, they're every time, I have never seen a negative relationship. It's always positive. So we can absolutely state our proficiency in the language we teach will impact our self-efficacy. I think that's not a very controversial statement, but that we see that empirically now as well. Yeah, and it's very strong for classroom proficiency, that relationship between the general proficiency and classroom proficiency. We see it very much more strongly with the classroom proficiency scale. Teaching experience is an interesting one. I think it's kind of intuitive that we think the longer we've been teaching, the more confident we're going to be. And that's actually not necessarily the case. So there's a methodological part of this. I mean, when we do a survey, the easiest thing is how many years have you been teaching? And then you can run the relationship. It's a nice and simple question on a survey, but we don't have a lot of the nuance of what's happening in teachers' experiences. So we see that here. This is a good example. We had kind of novice, mid-range, longer experienced teachers. Just because you've been teaching for 10 years does not necessarily mean you're going to have higher confidence in your capabilities. And that's where Professor Fayez and we've been pushing for more qualitative data that kind of gets at what's happening in teachers' experiences. And I've even seen some studies that suggest that maybe there's a tipping point where we start to have maybe a curvilinear relationship where we hit that point where maybe our self-efficacy starts to go down because we're disconnected from our students to various reasons, disconnected to the newer methods and technology, things like that. Yeah, so there could be some stabilization. Maybe you have to think about their self-efficacy after that initial stages. And then finally, teaching context, it's kind of hard to pull out what's actually at play there. Some people say, oh, it's smaller classroom sizes, you have more resources in the private school context. They had higher proficiency in the private institutes here, but the other subscales really didn't show much of a difference. And so we did this analysis because we had it. So, I mean, poor Lena, she's doing her thesis. I said, why not just go for it, Lena? Let's see what we find. How do we interpret that? There's so many things. Part of it might be just proficiency. It might just go back to proficiency. Maybe the private school teachers just have better self-reported proficiency. So there's a lot of kind of unaccounted for things in this analysis. This is me still. It's a small, uneven sample. And as I said, the data was not perfect. So we had to make some methodological decisions in terms of how we grouped people. It's quantitative only. We need more qualitative stuff. I did do interviews for my thesis, but I learned from my mistakes. I didn't do the interviews very well. So more qualitative data. I tried, but I made a mistake. And some of the implications, maybe our self-efficacy can be kind of stable. Some people say maybe after those first 3 years, a lot of disagreement about this, but maybe, once we're past our novice stage of teaching, maybe our self-efficacy is what it is. There's lots of disagreement on that. We need to support language proficiency and language teacher education. I think that's something, blending language teacher education and proficiency development, thinking about how teachers teach with the language of instruction. And in this case, the practicum was not impactful. So the idea that we wanted to measure practicum, but these teachers have been teaching for so long, they're so far removed from their practicum experience, maybe probably not the most impactful variable. So there's no impact here, but definitely we're not trying to denigrate the value of a practicum. We think it's absolutely worthwhile. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much.